I'd like to call the meeting for the Committee on Sustainability and Green Initiatives to order. Jared, may I hear the invited guests?
We have the Honorable Erica Strasburger from Pittsburgh City Council, Myrna Newman from Allegheny Cleanways, Dr. Sherry Mason from Penn State Erie, and Farran Savitz from Penn Environment.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Bennett.
Here.
Mr. Dewar. Mr. Klein.
Here.
Mr. Macy.
Here.
Ms. Nakaradi-Chakis.
Here.
Mr. Walton. Chairwoman Pritzia.
Here.
We also have Mr. Palmasina and Mr. Palmieri with us. Anybody on the phone?
No, just Councilwoman Bennett.
Okay.
Approval of the minutes.
We have none.
Hello and welcome to the Committee on Sustainability and Green Initiatives hearing about pollution from single-use plastic products. Through tonight's presentations, we will learn how plastic pollution harms Allegheny County's rivers and natural spaces, the effects of plastic pollution on human health, the story of how Pittsburgh successfully pursued its ordinance on plastic bags, and tangible next steps for leaders throughout Allegheny County interested in following suit. I will curate a question and answer session with our panelists immediately following tonight's presentations. We will entertain questions first from council members, whether they're in the room or online. Questions may be submitted at any point during the hearing through our online form, which can be accessed by scanning the QR code at the bottom of the right-hand corner of tonight's slideshow, or at bit.ly/ACCPQ. And please note that the letters ACCPQ must all be capitalized. Otherwise, the link will not work. For those attending virtually, we will also provide a link in the chat to the question submission form. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn things over to our first speaker, Ms. Newman, Executive Director of Allegheny Cleanways.
Back in 2019, Allegheny Cleanways, so first of all, our mission is to engage people to clean up litter and illegal dumping. And for years, we've been cleaning up trash and intuitively knowing that a lot more and more of it was plastics. But we had never really cataloged that in any real way. What we would always report out was the tonnage that we collected. But we started realizing that tonnage does not really reflect plastic in the same way that it reflects construction debris, for instance. So we decided to do an actual audit of our cleanup. So we spent 5 days and collected all the trash from 3 riverfront cleanups, 2 dump site cleanups, and 3 litter cleanups. And with 49 or more volunteers, we sorted all of the trash, weighed it all, cataloged it all, counted every piece, and even did a brand on it. And within that 5 days, or within those cleanups, we collected over 6,000, almost 7,000 pounds of trash, and almost 12,000 pieces of trash. And this was kind of the breakdown of the trash. Vast majority of it was plastics. That's that pink section. But also there are other sections that we didn't count directly as plastics, but have a lot of plastic in them. Textiles, for instance, are now mostly made up of plastics. Much of our miscellaneous category were mixed items that had both plastics and something else in it. There's a photo coming up here, I think, of let me get, yep, I guess I don't have it, sorry. But go back. Something like a mixer or a hand mixer or something like that would be an item that might be in the miscellaneous category, where it had metal mixer beaters, but a plastic shell. So the diagram or the chart that I just showed doesn't really even get the full effect of all the plastics. This is how it was broken down on land and water. On water, again, the vast majority were plastics. And these were mostly the lightweight plastics that float to the top of the river and end up on the river banks. Dump sites, again, still a big portion of plastics, but then there are all the other items that still, many of them contained plastic. The different types of plastic that we found majority were bottles, jugs, and jars. And again, that's partly because of the nature of the riverfront cleanups. That type of thing tends to float a little bit more and end up on our riverfronts. Film was another piece of plastic that was film and food packaging, and they kind of go together. Much of the food packaging was also film. The thing about film is that it breaks down relatively quickly. And so, in 10 years, a plastic bag might be broken down into its component parts. But in 3 years, when we might be collecting it, it's broken to the point of it's just shreds. And so when we try to pick it up, it just shreds. So this, again, is probably not as an accurate depiction of what the real problem is with film. And food packaging. Styrofoam was also a big one. And then there was just all the other types of plastic. The chart below this shows that the majority of the items were not recyclable, at least not in our Pittsburgh and most of Allegheny counties curbside recycling. It's just some photos to show the different types of plastics. This was taken just in our dumpster from our riverfront cleanup. And again, you can see all the bottles and all the different types of plastics, including plastic bags that end up in there. Hats, balls, styrofoam, looks like a plastic, I don't know if that's a hockey puck or what that is. Crates, Crocs, all of the things that anything that has been manufactured finds its way to our lands and eventually our waterways. As I mentioned, we did a brand analysis also, and a lot of it was not branded. Either the brand had fallen off. Plastic water bottles are a good example of that. The film, many of them have a film wrap that wraps around them, and so by the time we get them, they're essentially unbranded. But surprisingly, PepsiCo was the #1 company, parent company of all the brands that we analyzed or that we found. And I say surprisingly because internationally, Coke is the #1 company, but here in this area, Pepsi is. And I think it has a lot to do with contracts. And I don't know exactly all of the ins and outs of how restaurants and convenience stores decide what to purchase, but ours was the reverse of what is normally found. So that's it in a nutshell. I'll stop sharing so you don't have to keep looking at that. But that just gets at the nature of the problem. We find hundreds of thousands of pieces of plastic every year, tons. We average about 4 tons a year just from the riverfronts alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker who's ready to go?
Dr. Sherry Mason.
Dr. Sherry Mason, please.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, and kudos to Myrna and her crew, because I've been cleaning up rivers here in Erie, and I know how much work that is. So excellent job. And for the record, we also found PepsiCo to be the top one in Erie, Pennsylvania. So thank you so much for having me. I study plastic pollution. So this is my field of research. I do want to preface that I'm an environmental chemist. I don't actually, I'm not an ecotoxicologist, so I am aware of the studies that have been done on human health, but that is not my area of expertise. But this is what I was asked to speak to you about, and I'm very honored to be here and talk about this. If we're going to talk about the impacts of plastic on human health, I think it's really important for us to start by understanding exactly what plastic is. Plastic is ultimately composed of a polymer, and a polymer is kind of like a train. It's a long chained molecule that's composed of these repeating units. So for example, polyethylene, which is our most commonly manufactured plastic, is composed of ethylene monomers. And this is actually where you kind of get to the starting point of the impact of plastics, because of course these monomers come from fossil fuels, right? So it's the extraction and refining of fossil fuels. That's the starting point of plastics. And from this moment, they're already impacting human health. No better evidence than the train derailment just, in the vicinity of Allegheny County. And what's all over the news is the fact that it was transporting vinyl chloride, which is going to be used or was going to be used to make polyvinyl chloride, PVC. And so there's a dramatic demonstration of the impact of that material. Within the United States, the dominant kind of the place where vast majority of refining happens is along the Gulf Coast of the United States, in an area that's referred to as Cancer Alley. So again, really highlighting the fact that plastic from the moment that it's born is having an impact on human health. And should you feel like that's just too far away, well, because of hydrofracking, the Guardian, published this article, Will a Push for Plastics Turn Appalachia into the Next Cancer Alley? Because though we hear a lot about dry gas coming out of hydrofracking and its use for energy, the reality is half of hydrofracked gas is actually wet gas, which is not used for energy, but is going to in fact be used to manufacture plastics. Again, being demonstrated by this facility, which I realize is in Beaver County, but just, very close to you guys in Allegheny. This company has already exceeded its air commitments. It's on several occasions to the point where it's now, and it's only been in operation for 4 months. So again, just this kind of the reality that plastic is impacting humans from the moment that it's born and as it's being created. 2 more facilities are being planned for down the Ohio River, and this is what these facilities actually produce, these tiny little plastic pellets that are known as nurdles and are transported to places where plastics are manufactured into common consumer goods. These are a good demonstration of a term that's used called microplastics, right? So these pre-production plastic pellets are a form of microplastic. Microplastics, by definition, is any plastic particle that's between 1 nanometer and 5 millimeters in size, which is quite a broad size range. But those plastic pellets fit into that. They're an example of a primary microplastic. So something that was produced to be micro-sized. However, most microplastics come from the breakage of larger plastic items. So what Myrna was referring to, I tend to stay away from breakdown because that makes it sound like it's a natural decomposition type of process. I would say breakage or break into smaller pieces, because even as plastics break into these ever smaller pieces, it's still plastic. It's still retaining all of those same chemical properties. And this is what we refer to as secondary microplastics. So all of those items that Myrna was talking about finding, those break into ever smaller pieces through this largely mechanical process, forming microplastics. And the problem with microplastics is that they're so small that they're very easy to make their way into plants, animals, and us, right? Through the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, and every place in between. And then that has the impact of possibly affecting our human health, right? So evidence of the fact that microplastics are making their way into us, some headlines here, right? We're finding it in our poop. The placental boundary layer, this study was quite interesting because they found it on both the maternal and the fetal side. So there's no doubt it's making its way across that, barrier to the point that our children have more plastic within them than we have within us. And then these studies that came out just last year, finding it in human blood and in our lungs. So there's no doubt it's making its way into us. And the question is, well, what is the impact? Well, I'm going to break that question into two pieces, right? This is just a slide I showed earlier where we talked about the fact that plastic is a polymer. So that's one question that we can ask. What is the impact of that polymer? This is actually the area of plastics that we know the least about. It's the front line of kind of these questions and ecotoxicology studies looking at plastics and human health, but emerging science that's coming out is not good, right? That it's being connected to neurological disorders, specifically things like Alzheimer's, because it does make its way across the blood-brain barrier, and plastic being such an insulatory material, it reduces the transmission of information across those neurological boundaries. The second part of this, though, is that plastic is not just a polymer. And in fact, many plastics by weight have more additives than they have polymers. And these are additives, they're put there for a very specific reason, right? This isn't something sinister. Plasticizers that allow the plastics to be moldable, colorants so that we can have them in different colors, flame retardants so that they're not as flammable because, again, these are made from fossil fuels, which we burn. Right, so these are naturally those pretty combustible materials, and so flame retardants are added. These chemicals, actually, we know quite a bit about. These chemicals are known to be endocrine disruptors. That means that they mimic hormones, which are the chemical messengers of the body, and so when they disrupt those messages, it's kind of like that game of telephone we all played in summer camp. It can lead to a whole suite of human health impacts. We are seeing men become effeminized, so sperm counts are going down, the distance between the anus and the scrotum is getting smaller, and intergenerational penile size is going down. We're also having reproductive issues on the maternal side or the female side. The window for which a woman can viably carry a pregnancy is getting smaller. We're seeing increases in specific types of cancer that are associated with these chemicals. That's what the vinyl chloride discussion has been all about, is the fact that it's a known carcinogen. Prostate cancer in men and ovarian and breast cancer in women. It's also been linked with autism, ADHD, and obesity, and specifically obesity in children under the age of 6 months. You don't have to take my word for it. These are two excellent books if you're interested in reading some more information about this. Our Stolen Future is written by the mother of endocrine disrupting chemistry, Theo Colburn, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And just out last year is this incredible book by Dr. Shauna Swan called Countdown. Highly recommend reading. There's a whole chapter in there on plastics. And with that, I probably took up my 10 minutes, so I will stop sharing and open it up for questions or move on to the next person.
Council Member Strasburger?
Well, first of all, so my name is Erica Strasburger. I represent District 8 in the city of Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh City Council, and I'm grateful to be here today. I want to thank Councilwoman Fazio for inviting me and for chairing this committee, and for Penn Environment for the work they did to put into this this meeting today, and to all of you for serving in the way that you do. So I'm here to talk a little bit about our plastic bag ban the city of Pittsburgh was able to pass in April of 2022, almost a year ago. I'll start with the first slide, why it's necessary. So I think we've already heard from the last two speakers why it's necessary. I'll go through a little bit more of some of the whereas clauses that we put into our bill in case others were considering a similar bill. So we know that Americans use about 100 billion plastic bags a year, which requires 12 million barrels of oil to manufacture. You can stay on the first slide. I'll give you a signal when we need to move on. We know that the processes, the extraction that is required to produce plastics, we heard, can cause everything from asthma to childhood leukemia to cancer, cardiac problems, birth defects, and it takes up space in our waste system. So plastic takes about 500 years to decompose, but more likely, as we've heard, it breaks into smaller pieces, creating microplastics, which harm our health and that we're consuming every single day. We also know that plastic bags that we think of when we think of, receiving free, I'll put air quotes around the word free for the time being, free bags that are meant to be single use with our groceries or at a point of sale are incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to recycle. For the city of Pittsburgh and our recycling capabilities and who we contract with, it just isn't possible. We don't have that option here. It jams machinery. It's not accepted by most recycling centers. And then we also know that we've been compelled by Act 101 of 1988 for municipalities to establish recycling source separations collection programs that engage in waste reduction efforts. So there is a state mandate to recycle as much as possible. The city of Pittsburgh, there's a financial component as well. The city of Pittsburgh in 2018 spent about $2.7 million on litter prevention, about $58,000 on litter education and outreach, and about $2 million on litter abatement, and another $330,000 on enforcement. So there's an economic cost to litter, in addition to it changing and degrading our communities and the pride that we take in our neighborhoods and our communities. So those are the reasons, in addition to many of the other reasons we've already heard, we wanted to take on, with a whole coalition of organizations I'll get to in a second, wanted to take on reducing plastic waste, at least when it comes to what we think is one of the easiest way to do this, single-use plastic bags. Next slide, please. We know that a plastic bag, some people use it for their trash bags, so it's great, but some people use it once and then throw it away and it ends up in our landfill, or at worst, it ends up in our rivers, along the sides of roads, breaking into microplastics. This shows, I know it's hard to read, but it shows a timeline of the work that it just demonstrates we aim to engage as many constituencies as possible. That was everyone from our nighttime economy manager to understand how this will affect our nighttime businesses, like takeout restaurants and other other businesses like that. United Food and Commercial Workers to understand how this will affect grocery stores. We've held roundtable discussions. We have met with the Pennsylvania Food Merchants Association. So really trying to get a diverse set of organizations and interests involved. I do have to give shout outs to this large coalition of organizations that really was instrumental in helping us, working hand in hand with council to get it over the line. And it included Penn Environment, Sustainable Pittsburgh, the Plastics Collaborative as a whole, Humane Action Pittsburgh, Clean Water Action, Pittsburgh Food Policy Council, Clean Air Council, Pennsylvania Resources Council, Allegheny Cleanways. We had a class of Chatham University students who worked with us for a semester at the city Sustainability and Resilience Division of Environmental Service of Department of City Planning, Environmental Services, and my fellow council colleagues who helped get it over the finish line. We also had business partners who helped us. Giant Eagle has already committed to going plastic free, both with their bags and then the generic products that they sell over the next several years. And they're already on board with this. They're ready to go in Pittsburgh. They've dealt with plastic bag bans, single-use plastic bag bans in other markets and are ready to go here as well. Big Burrito Restaurants, which already uses paper bags for takeout, was helpful as a, giving critical feedback to us and understanding what it's like to be a food merchant and maybe not one that has the same revenue or flexibility as they have. So really understanding and getting in the head of those smaller organizations. We conducted interviews with cities that already have this in place, like Washington, D.C. or New York City. We talked to states like Delaware and Hawaii. And we met with the Black Environmentalist Collective to understand, the concerns, the equity concerns that we were hearing a little bit about and wanted to dig into a little bit more. So really work to be as deliberative as possible. That said, we understand that there's no way to talk with everyone and inform everyone prior to passing a bill, but we did the best we could. So on to the next slide. The legislation is fairly simple. It bans retailers from distributing single-use plastic bags at the point of checkout, with a few exceptions. So I would say that the biggest misconception is that this bans any kind of plastic, the sale of any kind of plastic bag. It doesn't. You can still buy trash bags. You can still buy dog waste bags. You can still buy, you can purchase bags in bulk that are sold at the stores as you need them. Of course, we do want to minimize that, but it does not ban the sale of those bags. The bag that you get complimentary or really included in the price of what you're paying for as you go to the grocery store, as you order takeout food, will no longer be plastic. So the bill requires that to either be paper or for people to bring their own bags. And paper bags must be certain percentage recycled paper, and they must also charge a minimum 10-cent fee for that paper bag that they're distributing. The goal isn't to move to paper because we know that paper isn't the most sustainable type of material either, right? Even if it's recycled paper, it takes, it is recyclable more so than plastic, but it does take our natural resources to create them. But rather, the goal is to have a fee that is just high enough to hopefully not be a burden for the majority of people, and I'll get to that in a second, but to discourage people from using plastic paper bag and moving instead toward a reusable bag and getting in the habit of using reusable bags. The fee is retained by the retailer. So we worked with a number of different models. Should it go back to the city into a trust fund that could be used for litter abatement? Should it go half and half to the city and to the retailer? We figured the simplest thing and the thing that will help most retailers be able to manage this is if they can keep the fee for whatever purposes they see fit, whether it is to purchase the paper bags that they need, which given supply chain issues are a little bit more expensive than 10 cents a bag, or to use to create an incentive program if they wanted to. Let's say that if a person brings their own reusable bag, they could get 2 cents off or 5 cents off their purchase. Whatever purpose they want to use, we want to give them the flexibility. And they certainly could charge more than 10 cents if they need that to recoup costs of this program. And then it establishes a framework for the city of Pittsburgh to really conduct public education, promote a reusable bag distribution program. We plan on creating City of Pittsburgh sponsored bags, but we also would love for there to be a positive aspect of this. And all neighborhoods in the city of Pittsburgh come up with a competition to create the best neighborhood bag. They could show off their neighborhood pride. We think this will really spur a lot of entrepreneurial spirit as well. And, you know, the theory here is the burden shouldn't fall on the consumer individually to have to mitigate single-use plastic waste. We want to create systems that do that and make it as easy as possible, even if there is a stick along with the carrot. So next slide, please. We have gone through every possible consideration and weighed every single possible way to change the legislation to make it as easy as possible, but it's not possible to do that with every legislation or every, you know, the legislation isn't the end all be all. The implementation will be a big part of it as well. So some concerns we've heard were, how will we inform the public sufficiently? And part of that is going to have to happen through, I mean, we believe a lot of it's already happened. People are largely aware of this and need to be reminded. But as we have the job posting out for the environmental compliance manager who will manage this program at the Department of Environmental Services. They will work closely with us and with our Office of Nighttime Economy and with a number of different other partners to be able to be the central focus and control command to be able to answer business questions, but actually actively go out into small businesses using an equity framework, using, you know, going into the businesses where we know there might be even less of a ability to connect to resources or to information, and starting with the neighborhoods that need that kind of the most. And, you know, partnering with all of our different departments that touch the public, whether it's Parks and Rec, where we can hand out information and free reusable bags, cloth bags at city pools over the summer, at farmers markets, at rec centers, at healthy active living centers or senior centers, all the different ways we interact with the public, working with Pittsburgh public schools, all of our schools. So that's a challenge, but it's something that we're committed to. We also want to make sure we're providing in that position and with the Department of Department of Public Works, providing the retailers with technical and other support. So Giant Eagle, big organization, already committed to this. They're in pretty good shape. What about the mom and pop ones? I will say also, this is something that was added to the bill when it was pointed out that a 10-cent per bag fee might be a real burden to some individuals. If you are at a participating retailer that accepts EBT cards, WIC, you know, food stamps, essentially, that you are exempted from paying that fee. You get the paper bag without paying the fee. And we also recognize, though, that then the retailer might not be recouping the fee that other retailers are. So it's a balance. We're going to have to continue to work. We want to make sure that as this rolls out, we're focusing more on education than we are on penalties. We don't want to over penalize. That's not what this is about. At a certain point, there will have been enough time for the transition to occur, and you know there will have to be penalties attached to it. But we want to provide education and resources first. That is the goal. So I think that covers it. I'm happy to take questions when the time is right for the questions to answer anything you'd like to know.
Thank you so much. Is there another speaker that's?
Aaron is only able to connect, said he can call in if he's not on Teams there.
You sent him the info.
I did. I texted him that.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, awesome, perfect. Okay, I apologize, I'm calling in through the phone. I'm having some trouble with the team setup, but my name's Farron Savitz. I'm the Zero Waste Advocate with Penn Environment. Thank you to County Council for both inviting me here to talk to you all and for holding this meeting. And I also want to thank our other speakers for coming here today and talking about various parts about this issue. It was great to hear all that they had to say as well. At Penn Environment, I think we've spent the past several years working with local leaders across Pennsylvania to tackle plastic pollution and litter because of a lot of what's already been said here today. It gets in our waterways when it's littered. It's a burden for our recycling systems. It can impact the health of our wildlife, the health of our environment, and our health too. But we've also been working on it because as a society, we generate so much waste. and so much of that waste is plastic. Every year, Americans generate about 35 million tons of plastic waste, but less than 6% is recycled, so that the rest of that is going to end up in a landfill, in an incinerator, or polluting our environment. And we've heard about the harms through litter, the harms it poses our health. We've heard how Pittsburgh has tackled this problem, but I think it bears repeating because we use these products in so many parts of our lives, and often for just a few minutes before throwing them away, that there is no away. If it's ending up in a landfill, if it's ending up in our rivers, our parks, our streams, our streets, these plastic products are harming us. Our own research has found microplastic pollution in over 100 rivers and streams across Pennsylvania, including 7 right in Allegheny County. These are the places we get drinking water from, the places where we fish, where we boat, where children play. So these plastics are everywhere, they're in our lives, and they never truly go away. And so the best thing we can do is stop using them. If we turn off the tap, if we stop the flow of plastic into our lives, then we can stop the flow into our environment. And we do that exactly how Pittsburgh did it, through bans and other restrictions on products like the plastic bags given out at retail establishments. That can also be on bans on polystyrene foam containers or restrictions on plastic straws and utensils. These policies have been done effectively in thousands of municipalities around the country and the world, and they've even been passed at the state level in 10 different states in the United States. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania is lagging behind some of our neighbors. While they've taken action to curb plastic waste, we've moved backwards in recent years. The state legislature has passed a preemption law, taking the authority to tackle plastic pollution away from municipalities. That preemption expired at the end of 2021, and that power is now back with local governments where it belongs. And that's fitting because our municipalities are the ones who deal with trash and recycling. They deal with litter, keeping parks and streets clean. Plastic is hard to recycle, and items like plastic bags can even make recycling for other items more expensive by clogging sorting equipment, clogging storm drains, making flooding and heavy rainfall worse, and it plagues our lives in ways that are acutely felt at the local level. So I and Penn Environment have been working with cities, townships, and boroughs across the state to rein in single-use plastics, and to date, 15 municipalities have passed restrictions on single-use plastic bags, including our 2 largest cities, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. These laws cover 16% of the population, and when they all take effect, they could eliminate over 780 million single-use plastic bags, equivalent to over 4,300 tons, not pounds, tons of plastic waste that would otherwise end up incinerated in a landfill or littering our environment. The momentum for action has really shifted, especially in the past year. 2022 was groundbreaking in these efforts to eliminate harmful single-use plastics. Last year alone, 11 municipalities passed bans on single-use plastic bags, and in some cases, other single-use plastics as well. And it's truly great to see so many cities, boroughs, and townships taking on action, but we need more. So the best thing for Allegheny County is for its townships and boroughs to follow Pittsburgh's lead and pass their own local ordinances. And a plastic bag ban is a great first step. It's effective, it's been done before, and there are readily available alternatives, both paper bags, but better reusable bags. Penn Environment has developed a set of resources, including model legislation. We have reports and data. We have resources for local activists and volunteers to help in this process. But a crucial point I want to stress is that these laws are not just about getting rid of plastic. And I feel like Councilperson Strasburger has already said a lot about our recommended policies and the best things that can go into these laws. But I do want to talk again about that small fee on paper and reusable bags, because although plastic is the worst option for our environment, other options have a footprint too. And we really want to encourage people to bring their own reusable option from home. So if you bring your own reusable bag wherever you go shopping, then you are making the biggest impact that you can. So by pairing a ban on plastic with a small fee of around 15 cents on other bags, you're creating an incentive, you're creating a reminder for people to switch to reusable. And it can create ripples, leading to changes in other parts of people's lives. If you're used to using and bringing a reusable bag with you, you might remember a reusable water bottle. or to avoid plastic ones. You might bring a reusable mug or thermos to a coffee shop. You might have reusable straws, takeout containers, utensils. It sort of filters through your life. And so a plastic bag ban is a great step, not just for its immediate impact, but for some of the changes in mentality it creates. I want to just quickly highlight a few other key components of our model plastic bag ban that we find important. In our definition, we wanted to make sure that these types of laws apply to as many types of retail as possible. So that means not just grocery stores have to get rid of plastic bags, but convenience stores, restaurants, gas stations, clothing stores, farmers markets. If we can get as many retailers as possible eliminating single-use plastics and encouraging the use of reusables, then the better it will be overall, because that does ripple out and filter through society. We also wanted to make sure that as many types of plastic bag is covered. So that doesn't mean trash bags, it doesn't mean pet waste bags, but the bags provided at checkout. So we made sure that regardless of how thick or thin a plastic bag was, it was a plastic bag and it would be banned if it's made from a bioplastic or a compostable plastic. When it comes down to it, these are all plastic bags that are used by and large for just a few minutes before becoming waste. So it is always better to use a reusable alternative that we can bring with us and use over and over and over again. And education, as was talked about with the Pittsburgh plan, is a key point of this, because this is not a law that will happen overnight. It's not like an ordinance passes and the next day every retailer has to stop using plastic bags. It's an adjustment. Our model recommends a 3-month runway after an ordinance passes, but before the ban itself goes into effect. You can extend that to 6 months to a year. You don't want to make it too long, but it can be flexible. And that helps give retailers time to adjust. It lets them educate their customers. It lets you as an elected official or a local leader let the retailers know about the changes coming. It makes the adjustment period easier for everyone. These types of laws are broadly supported by Pennsylvanians. We've seen the wealth of support in Pittsburgh. We've seen it from businesses, from Giant Eagle to smaller stores. And we know that by dramatically reducing the distribution of plastic bags, we dramatically reduce the pollution in our environment. Every resident of Allegheny County has experienced watching plastic bags blowing down streets through our neighborhoods, seeing them stuck in curbside trees and bushes, in our parks and our outdoor places. We've had enough. I urge our local officials around the county to take action and eliminate these plastic products that plague not just our environment, but our lives. And I will also be available for more questions about the model legislation.
Thank you very much. This was very enlightening. I'd like to turn it over to my council members if anyone has a question.
I do, if you don't mind.
Councilmember Fournier?
I have this little story to share with you. I have a friend of mine just married a woman from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he brought her to the shop not too long ago. And I asked her how she liked Allegheny County, how she liked Pennsylvania. She said, John, we have one of the most beautiful areas in the world. She said, well, why do you litter? You people are litter pots. She said, this is awful. This would not float in Oklahoma. You people have to do something about it. I asked Mr. Barker years ago, can we do anything in Allegheny County about litter? And I got stonewalled. This happens, we have to do this, we can't do that, but blah, blah, you know, it's beyond our purview, blah, blah, blah. So I want you to know, I've been thinking about this for a long time. This is disgusting, listening to what's going on here in this country. It truly, truly is. And too many people, you see tonight, there's 6 of us. That's just a little over 1/3 of the council here, okay? That's another problem. This is a key issue. There are only 6 of us here. Okay, we represent 130 communities. Okay, there are only 6 of us are here. I want to emphasize that again. I'm missing meeting after meeting. I'm up for re-election this year, and I'm missing meeting after meeting all over the place. Last night, I spent 3.5 hours on Air Advisory Committee, which I'm on, because that's important also too. So I missed a lot of things, a lot of shaking hands, a lot of people, a lot of voting constituents. But this is important to me. And that's why I came back today, because I have at least 3 or 4 places I could have gone to. So I want you to know, as far as Paul Mary's concerned, this is a real key issue. Okay, and I want to tell you why PepsiCo is number one on our riverbanks. Acrisure Stadium. PepsiCo bought the rights. Coke had it for years, but PepsiCo bought it a couple of years ago. Okay, this is Pepsi territory. I've worked for a friend of mine years ago in Giant Eagle, and I'm gonna tell you, Pepsi is number one here, and then people that explode out of that store. So I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised PepsiCo is the main culprit here. So what do we do about this? And I commend Nita. She gets into the nitty gritty. She brings things in here. This is key. This is great. But what do we do? What can we do as county council? What is beyond our purview? What is our purview? What are we supposed to do here? So I just wanted to know, I'm up here for direction. If there's anything we can do, anything that you bring to the council, I'll be more than happy. And I also chair the executive committee, and I'll bring it up time and time again. So I want you to know. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take on much more time, but I just wanted you to understand, this is important, and we need to do something in Allegheny County. Because you go down to South Park, I run down South Park every week. You can't believe the pollution down. Stuff thrown all over the place. My running partner and I would pick up stuff in the parking lot down there for half an hour before we even start running. Nobody cares. They just, some of the young people, and I don't want to bad rap the young people, but some of them were very careless. But you know what? We adults, we set the bad example. What? This was being polluted, and we had litter long before these kids were. So we gotta take responsibility here too. Thank you for hearing me.
We really created that model.
Go ahead.
So I do,
It's your fault.
yeah, I do have a question. So, Eric, obviously, you've done the yeoman's work in terms of, bringing us to the point where we are right now. So I guess one of the questions I would ask is when you were taking a look at what would make sense for the city, were there particular cities that you were focused on in terms of, a successful rollout, a successful implementation? You thought, well, if it can work there, this would be a really big model.
Well, our biggest model at first was Philadelphia. And so if Philadelphia can do it,
Well,
of course, Pittsburgh has to try to do it, right?
Right.
Look them upstate, Cuyahoga County also already has it in place, so. So I would say that there were a lot of different models. There's no one city that does it exactly the same. There's no one model for every city. I think it was the most challenging part of it. And what we noticed, and I think that I can probably turn it over to Farron to go through some of the other examples for other cities and maybe the downsides of implementation. Those that allowed for, that banned the distribution of single-use plastic bags, but did not attach a fee to paper, that was a big red flag because it just didn't work. It just didn't work to disincentivize them paper and move to reusable bags. So that was one thing that we found needed to happen. We also found that, is it political? Yes, but the fee, again, going back to the retailers rather than, got a lot more retailers on board. Now, is every retailer going to be happy when we do implement this? No. There's going to be a lot of grumbling. There's going to be a lot of change that needs to occur, but that helped. One thing we have learned through implementation is that unless you already have a department like Philadelphia has, they have their own sort of Department of Commerce or sort of business commerce ready to go. We had trouble fitting it in where this was going to land. Is it sustainability and resilience? Is it environmental services? Where we landed was Department of Public Works administration. So not environmental services per se, but administration of Department of Public Works. And, it did take us time. We passed it in April. Ideally, we would have passed it the December before, but we needed some more time to work through some issues and meet with some more people. We passed it in April last year. And then we had to pass a budget that included money for that position, right? So the budget passed in December. Position is out for, it's open right now if anyone wants to apply. So that's a job opening. And it does take time. So in some cities, perhaps 3 months, 6 months does work. For us, it was taking a little bit longer. And from there, we looked at, like I mentioned, Washington DC, Hawaii, Delaware for the implementation and the rollout. What we learned from the interviews with the managers of these programs in other cities is you have to have an office, if not a whole office, one person who is the command control center, right? Who has the information about all the different aspects of the bill, information about all the different types of education efforts out there and resources that businesses and consumers can take advantage of. That's the most important part.
Yeah, with respect to Philadelphia, I'm typically in Philadelphia or many times every year, probably for the past 40 years. I remember when the rollout started in Philadelphia and it wasn't pretty. And I think I saw more Mayor Kenny effigies hanging on the streets of South Philly. I mean, it was really pretty ugly, but, but they're doing it. And even, small, mom and pop operations are doing it and people are, I mean, with some resistance are getting on board. So I think it's pretty good. I mean, if the city of Philadelphia can, get their heads around this, I think that we certainly can. My sense is that there's probably going to be great push on this council.
I think the councilwoman raises a point of within the city of Pittsburgh, we've got that department and division then that, but at the county level.
Yeah.
And on another 129 municipalities, that coordination for some of the very much smaller
Yeah.
locales, I
Yeah.
think will be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah.
So we would have to really spend some time in terms of where it would land here in the county and then what that looks like in terms of the other municipalities in terms of enforcement and making sure that it gets implemented in those 129 locations.
Yeah.
That's a
And
lot.
I can speak a bit, this is Farron. I can speak a bit to how this has played out in other municipalities that are smaller than Pittsburgh that may not have the resources because they have passed these and they are starting to be enforced now. And it really does differ depending on resources, size, existing infrastructure. But our recommendation at Penn Environment is that for the municipalities that choose to take on a plastic bag ban, to not enforce it differently from how they would any other ordinance, law, or part of the code, where you don't need to be going into a business every week and checking for plastic bags. That's not the point of one of these ordinances. If you have an annual inspection of restaurants, then you could add inspecting for plastic bags to that. If you have existing citizen reporting infrastructure where people can report a pothole or a sign that's been knocked over, you could add plastic bags to that where people can say if a business is using plastic bags, and that'll help to divert resources towards, rather than checking everyone, just checking those. There are some municipalities where they're very small and their retail is very clustered and clumped, and they do much less active enforcement because they know everyone's going to abide by the legislation because they're all right next to each other. And so they don't really go out and do much unless someone complains. So it is a very case-by-case thing. Philly had some unique challenges with its rollout just because of the pandemic, the preemption law, and some provisions that are in its legislation. But there's certainly room for creativity and adaptation for anyone who does this.
Anita, this is Tom. I have a question if I can
Yes,
go
please.
once we're done.
Please.
So, Councilperson Strasburger, this is a question for you, and I might have missed it when you were talking about the ordinance and this from the city, but we're talking about enforcement. What is the enforcing body for the city for enforcing this? I imagine, I know we had met with now your former Chief of Staff Emily about this bill a while ago now, and this was one of the things we talked about in that meeting. But what department, what entity do you see enforcing this when it comes time to actually enforce it from the city's perspective?
That's a great question, and we did wrestle with this, but landed on underneath the compliance manager at Department of Public Works, DPW. There will be inspectors who work under that person, who might not be inspectors solely for the plastic bag ban. They could be inspectors for non-compliance and residential recycling or other items or non-compliance for, in the way that you store your own trash at an apartment building or whatnot. But those inspectors will be deployed to help with the enforcement part of it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you very much. And like I said, this was a big, when we met with Emily, this was a big discussion point. And I think from my conversations with Anita and the other members who have considered something like a plastic bag ban, as with everything with county council, especially enforcement's always a big question. So, I appreciate you lending that information and the work you guys did to get us at least a good foundation for this conversation to kick off. So, thank you. Thank you, Chairperson Portillo.
Anybody else? Okay, please.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
So you mentioned some numbers, and I got three of them. 58,000 was for educational. The 2 million was for abatement. The 300,000 was for enforcement. What was the 2.7? Is that your total budget? You were saying at the very beginning of your topic. I missed the 2.7 you said.
2.7 was for litter abatement. And the there were two different 2.7s. There was a 2.7 for litter prevention and a different 2.7-ish on litter abatement. And that's according to a report from, if you wanted to look it up, Keep Pennsylvania Beautiful, the cost of litter and illegal dumping in Pennsylvania.
So a lot of folks don't know. I ran the litter crews in the city of Pittsburgh, so I'm well aware of the problem. I worked 32 years there. I'm now the director of public works in Collier. For the last week and a half, I only have 14 miles of roads out there, square miles of roads. And for 2 weeks, we've been out there. Within a week's time after we're done, everything's back. It's an ongoing battle. It's undaunting. It's the same as with the tire issues you have in the city of Pittsburgh. I forget the number. I might be wrong with this, but I want to say the 1 year we collected maybe 50,000 tires. It was just, so I applaud everything you're doing here. So I would be with my council member right here, Mr. Paul Mary, probably most of us, to try to follow your lead. The other question I did have is just a question. So when you go into a store and they don't want, you can bring your own bag. Is there some criteria for that? Because if they have a bagger there, I'm just throwing this out there. He walks in with a bag that looks like he just threw a bunch of garbage in it. He comes in and you hand it to the bagger, or do they have to bag themselves?
There's no requirement.
Obviously, you don't shop for you.
My wife doesn't shop, rightfully so. I'm thinking, so you can bring any kind of bag into a department store. Is there any criteria for that?
There's no criteria for that. And what we want to tell people is, if you're like me, you have 200 plastic bags that you've gotten from something or other where you didn't have your reusable under your sink, right? You could bring those bags in and reuse them again and again if you wanted to, right? Like if you forget, there's just so many ways to handle it. Now, we did talk with the UFCW because we wanted to understand if they had any concerns about baggers touching, especially during the pandemic, when that was when we were working on this bill, touching a bag that someone might have brought from home, and they didn't seem to have any concerns about it. So I would hope that people would, wash their bags regularly, make sure they're bringing clean bags, but there's no regulation in this bill for that.
So in the city, one last question. So do they have a budget? Is there a number, is there a solid number that they have in the city for this?
The position, for the positions?
Not the position.
Yeah.
I'm not interested.
But for actual, like providing reusable bags and setting up that program, we do not have a budget for that as a line item per se. But so that will have to be an effort that's cobbled together over the course of next few months. To be able to
I follow your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I certainly applaud my colleague here. We put together the committee, and I'm deeply concerned about litter. As Councilman Palmasina said, I live in West Mifflin, and there's 837. There was crews out there, cleaned the whole place up, honest to goodness, in 1 week between Rankin Bridge and Duquesne. It's littered up again. I also watched two young people sit next to a garbage can at McDonald's. They get done eating and they just drop their stuff right there. So I think we have, there's other ways to approach instead of penalizing people, educating people. And sometimes you can educate through marketing and advertising. And I was wondering if you thought about approaching certain businesses and having their decal, their advertisement on reusable bags.
Great point that I didn't get the opportunity to mention. So kind of
Oh,
to the
okay.
point that, well, no,
Well, I'm
I
a marketing guy.
forgot.
I can't help
Exactly
it.
right. We've been in talks with the coalition of organizations that, again, it was a group effort that really helped to pass this bill. And the hope is that we can get a city-sponsored bag. If we don't have a budget, which we don't for that bag, is to get sponsorships.
Have
So to
you,
get the Giant Eagles to put their logo on it, to get others, and then there's a big city bag that we distribute.
this litter and plastic is a really big issue, and I'm wondering if there is a possibility reaching out to some of the foundations for some funding for the bags. I know you've probably all gone through this, but I just wanted to hear it for myself. But if anybody else is looking for reusable bag, there's a car show this weekend. Get on there. You can get as many as you want, I suppose. But there again, I applaud what you're doing, and if there's anything that I can do, we can do on this level, but there's only so much, as Councilman Palmieri said, there's only so much within our purview. But I do think we may be able to be a part of educating the community, because it's definitely in the people's hands.
Appreciate that. The other idea that we had, and I don't think this can be city run, but we hope that organizations, neighborhood groups, whoever can does this, is hold a drive for unused reusable bags. I go to events like car shows or whatever it is where I get the bags full of
Stuff.
tchotchkes, and I have a lot of them, probably more than I need. And if I wanted to, I could donate them to someone who didn't need them. Again, not something the city could comfortably run. Businesses probably wouldn't want to run that because they'd have to, make sure that there's a system to sanitize and keep them all clean. But neighborhood organizations, blocks could do that.
Well, I founded the Westminster Community Foundation, and we have community events. I'm just wondering how we could bring those type of reusable bags into our events and continue to make people aware of our issue.
I was thinking too, just in terms of, there are so many other entities that touch municipalities, because this would, in terms of a rollout, that it's a pretty big effort at a county level, but thinking about how we could engage Connect and the local government academy and ALOM and the COGS, because I think that they all touch municipalities and could help be the.
I think that would be great at
the
the
delivery
annual conference coming up.
Yeah,
That might be a
Well,
good topic.
really for
Yeah.
that conference, but I think that
I mean, nothing's ever too
you,
late.
you could perhaps get a program scheduled for April, but yeah, I think that, we would have to look at all those different entities that would help us in terms of, getting the message out to municipalities.
You have a lot of friends here. We just have to figure out a way to use, I guess, what influence we have and how to approach it. I'm sure there's a way of doing that.
We have to schmooze them.
Yeah,
Is there a possibility that we could get the county and the city together, or kind of form a coalition here where we could work together on this? Has that been talked about at all?
I haven't heard that. I'm
what?
welcome
City,
that
come down here.
on this issue. Yeah, absolutely.
That is fighting words, John. City, county.
I know. Oh, I know. 14th word, I know.
Well, there's a lot of litter out there, that's for sure. It ain't easy to pick up, so I did that job, and I will tell you a quick story, not gonna be quick, I promise. I remember walking down the street, back in the day, we had pick sticks, they don't use them no more, they use grabbers. I'll never forget the guy behind me, he had the pick stick, and he hit the water bottle, it was a plastic ball like that. Most folks don't know what's in there usually. Anybody know what's usually in them on the roads? It's urine.
Urine.
I tell you what, Look at the picnic,
Oh, my.
sprayed the two guys behind me. Well, and they funny, because I tell you what happened. We had to rush him to the hospital.
Oh, no.
It's vile. It can
Uh,
do a lot of damage, so you gotta be careful what you're picking up.
I'm not so sure I'm gonna share.
And never forget that story. He hit it and
Yeah.
sprayed all over him. It was so bad, they had to sit in the back of the pickup truck to drive him to the hospital.
Unfortunately, I'll never forget that story.
That's why I tell it. That's why I tell
I'm
it.
sure Myrna Newman, if she's still on, has lots of stories about tires and hillside pickups and
Yeah.
everything that they have.
Work out, yeah. I also think that, when was the last time you saw someone getting cited for throwing something out the window?
Mhm.
Biggest pet peeve I have is cigarette butts. It's disgusting.
And what about the litter programs and the litter bags and, things in cars? Yeah, I guess they get them filled up and they throw them out the window.
When was the last time you saw someone pulled over
Yes.
throwing something out the window? I haven't seen it in years. Back in the day, my mom, she'd kill me if I threw something out the window. Now, ongoing thing, they just throw it on the side of the street. It's ridiculous, but.
Mommy, you gotta learn to shop at Aldi's, get back your own there.
Yeah. I appreciate what's going on. I really do. I like the idea of a co-op. I really do.
Yeah.
Pack your own. You get to choose how it's packed.
Yeah.
You know how strong your various bags are. Those ones that are made of recycled bottles, I just recommend for a city bag because they're really flimsy and they rip and the handles tear and the bottoms tear. But I know which bags, I know where they go in my house. I know if I'm getting a bunch of stuff for a neighbor, which has happened a lot during the pandemic.
Yep.
And so packing your own is a good thing. I always kind of read it out, like cashiers say, thank you for bagging. It's like, I'm happy to bag. I prefer to bag.
Yeah.
Never mind, I never take bags from stores, but they would pack into my bag in some places, but it's like, there's no need. It's better this way. Makes sense.
Is there anybody on council? Questions?
I don't know.
Liv or if anyone's still on? Wow, there's a bunch of questions.
Here.
Yeah, do you have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I will say that the calls keep coming up in our conversation, so we might want to expedite our contact or reach out to them.
Yeah, we have several calls in this region. And you may want to consider 10, 15 minutes. It's not gonna ruin their day
Yeah.
or their agenda. One little story. I went through a divorce and I lost some money, but I had some left over. I went to the United Kingdom. I went through England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Swear to God, I saw no litter. No litter at all. And I think, why can't we do that? I mean, I do my part. I'm only one person. Why can't the people in this region, in this country, do the same thing? What's so hard about that?
Education.
Yeah. I mean, even if you go into a restroom, there's a can there. You wash your hands, you dry the paper towels, it's on the floor. What is going on?
It's not all the time.
Please do.
It has to go beyond the individuals, okay, this has to go at the corporate level, okay, and this is, I appreciate what you're doing, but no offense, I'm from Toronto, they did that 15 years ago, you know what I mean? And we all have a ton of reusable bags at home from 10 years ago when education was the goal here. So it has to go much higher, you walk into a grocery store and everything is in plastic. It used to be that you would get things that were in wax paper or pasta could be in a paperboard box, and literally everything is in plastic now. And the consumer can only do so much, okay? Water bottles are one of our biggest freaking problems. Why are we drinking out of those water bottles that can't be recycled in the city of the cap? This has to come from higher up than blaming the consumers, our hospitals. My God, the amount of plastic they produce every day. I mean, the average person, I think, cares a little bit to the extent that they know, but they feel completely helpless. Like we can take our plastic bags into Target, Giant Eagle, put them in those bins and they can be recycled. But how do you avoid all the gazillions of pieces of plastic, your spinach and everything you buy that cannot be recycled in Pittsburgh? It has to start much higher up. The corporations need to be encouraged to use compostables. Paper is bad, but bamboo, for example, is a sustainable product. And why there are other options that need to be explored, but they need some governmental incentive to do that. And, you know, I'll stop, I guess, but I'm just so excited. Like, we're just so far behind the ball. And when you say it's never too late, like, look at global warming, it is too late. It was 72 degrees today. I'm afraid it's too late on that. Maybe we can still have a chance to do something if we start, like, seriously, you know, but please, like, please do something. It's just so frustrating.
Thank you. Yeah. This meeting has gone a little bit, this is such an important topic, and I just want to thank all the speakers. I also want to thank all my council members to be so engaged. I mean, I think this is something we can actually work on and pursue. It's been recorded, correct? So if anybody wants a recording, but I think this is just a first step. I think to be in coalition with the city might be something, the COGS, the municipalities. And thank you so much, Penn Environment, for all your work. And I think this was a great meeting and I'm so appreciative. Thank you all for coming. I so appreciate it. Meeting adjourned, and there were such wonderful questions that we did not get to, but I have them now, and these are things we can discuss among ourselves.